Sure. Any last prayer requests this evening? We'll test your memory and lock that in, and then go to Hosea. Hosea chapter number 10. 9. Either way, we're not in Hosea tonight. I'm just going there to read a verse, all right? With the busyness of this week, I'm not ready to delve into it, but I want to highlight something to you, which will hopefully, this will be part A of next week. So it'll save me time next week. And if you understand what this is being, the historical background of this, it sure will help you understand what is being said here. So turn to Hosea, and we're going to spend more of our time though in the book of 2 Kings. But I want to show you something here. If you've noticed in Hosea, maybe you have read ahead. But in Hosea 8, we'll start there, because seeing you like that chapter. Verse number 5 says this: "Thy calf, O Samaria, hath cast thee off. Mine anger is kindled against them. How long will it be ere they attain to innocency?" There's a mention of a calf here. Now, if you look at chapter number 10 and verse number 5, it says, "The inhabitants of Samaria shall fear because of the calves of Bethaven, for the people thereof shall mourn over it, and the priests thereof that rejoiced on it, for the glory thereof, because it is departed from it." These calves are mentioned here in Hosea. Go back to 2 Kings. 2 Kings and chapter number 17. 2 Kings chapter number 17. Now verses 1 through 5 of this section, we'll read from here to follow along. 2 Kings 17. Verse number 1 says, "In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, began Hosea the son of Elah to reign in Samaria over Israel 9 years. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. Against him came up Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, and Hosea became his servant and gave him presents. And the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hosea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no present to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the lands and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years." You might understand this as well from Hosea from last week, where he talks about the silly dove. Does anybody remember anything about a silly dove last week? Or in your reading about a silly dove, what the silly dove did? It went somewhere, and then went somewhere else. It went up to Assyria, basically the silly dove that went to Assyria and then to Egypt. And that's how that's how the Israelites were, the northern kingdom. They relied on Assyria, and when things got bad with Assyria or thought they could conquer Assyria, they'd go down to Egypt for help, or when Egypt was the problem, they'd go to Assyria. It was like this silly dove that was just, without understanding, floating back and forth. And you see it played out here at the very end, right before they take over. Look at verse number 6. In the ninth year of Hosea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria, and placed them in Halah and in Habor by the rivers of Gozan, in the cities of the Medes. So the northern kingdom is taken much earlier than Judah, and they are taken into captivity. They don't go to Babylon. They are taken captive by the Assyrians and are taken captive and taken out of the land to Assyria. Now, if you wanted to read on, what the Assyrians did, because they took the people out, they put in their own inhabitants back into the land. So then you have this mixing later on of other inhabitants that come in, plus the Israelites. It's why the Samaritan woman why the Jews went round Samaria and didn't want to dwell there. It comes out of this particular time in history where they said, "Oh no, you aren't purebred Jews. You're mixed with the Assyrians from that captivity time." And so they would say, "Oh no, the Samaritans are not." And the Samaritans set up their own their own place to worship. In fact, the woman at the well was at Sychar. Sychar is Shechem, right by the two hills where the law was placed, the blessing and the curse. And I'll show you more about that in just a minute. But that's where and she said, oh, we've been worshiping here for way longer, is what she was saying. We've been here, this goes back further than Jerusalem, is what she says. And there was some truth to that in what she was saying. But that's all around. That comes out of this particular area. When they were taken captive, there was a blending that came back in. So the Assyrians took them captive. It says here in verse number 7, for so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, which had brought them up out of the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods, and walked in the statutes of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out from before the children of Israel, and the kings of Israel, which they had made. And the children of Israel did secretly those things that were not right against the Lord their God. So they did things secretly. Now just stop for a minute and remember the story of Hosea. What do you think how do you think Gomer was acting? Publicly or secretly for a big portion of the time? Secretly. It's secretly saying that what was taking place was being done secretly. Then it just became known. The children of Israel did secretly those things that were not right against the Lord their God, and they built them high places in all their cities, from the tower of the watchman to the fenced city. And they set them up images and groves in every high hill and under every green tree, and there they burnt incense in all the high places, as did the heathen whom the Lord carried away before them, and wrought wicked things to provoke the Lord to anger. And they served idols, whereof the Lord had said unto them, Ye shall not do this thing. Yet the Lord testified against Israel and against Judah by all the prophets and by all the seers, saying, Turn ye from your evil ways, and keep my commandments and my statutes according to all the law which I commanded your fathers, and which I sent to you by the servants the prophets. So in all this time that Israel is doing secretly and running off to all these other gods, he says when they're carried away, finally, he says, the Lord testified against them, and he sent prophets to say, repent, turn. Now, do you remember in Hosea, where Hosea says, plead with your mother, plead with her, which is what Hosea is saying to Gomer's children. He's saying, plead with your mother that she come back, which is what God did by sending his prophets, by sending his preachers, by sending those to the nation of Israel saying, come back to God, which God is still doing that today, even today, where a nation that walks away from him, and Australia, again, if you look at the census, is walking away from God. There are still preachers in this land, though, that are calling men and women to repentance. Turn back. Go plead. Who is going to go plead with this nation to come back to a God who loves them and stop walking away after the things of this world, which is exactly what our nation is walking after. They're becoming non-religious, which is just the modern way of saying worldly, which worldly is a god. It's the god of this world. It takes place in the heart, and God has been taken out, and he is looking. God sends his prophets and his seers and his men to stand up and to plead with those people to come back to God. Notwithstanding, verse 14, they would not hear, but hardened their necks like to their neck of their fathers that did not believe in the Lord their God, and they rejected his statutes and his covenants that he had made with their fathers, and his testimonies which he had testified against them, and they followed vanity and became vain, and went after the heathen that were round about them, concerning whom the Lord had charged them that they should not do like them. And they left all the commandments of the Lord their God, and made them molten images, even to calves, and made a grove, and worshipped all the host of heaven, and served Baal. And they caused their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire, and used divination and enchantments, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel, and removed them out of his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah only. Two calves come up here as well as one of the chief sins of the nation of Israel was two calves. Well, to find out what two calves mean, rewind the story even further, go back to 1 Kings chapter number 12. So that's the end of them when they're taken away. Now in 1 Kings chapter number 12, you find the very beginning of the northern kingdom. Solomon dies in 1 Kings chapter number 11. His son, Rehoboam, takes the throne. And Rehoboam, in verse number 1 of chapter 12, and Rehoboam went to Shechem. Now Shechem is the place where the woman at the well was. That's Sychar, that's the two mountains, Nebat and Gilboa, whatever. The blessing and the curse where Moses was told to put the blessing and the curse, and Joshua did it when he came to the land. So the very early place. So the woman at the well did have a point that it was a very old location for worship. So Rehoboam goes up north. He goes to Shechem. For all Israel will come to Shechem to make him king. And it came to pass when Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who was yet in Egypt, Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who was yet in Egypt, heard of it, for he was fled from the presence of King Solomon. And Jeroboam dwelt in Egypt. You can go back to chapter number 11 and find out why he fled. Verse 3 says that they sent and called him. And Jeroboam and all the congregation of Israel came and spake unto Rehoboam, saying, Thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore make thou the grievous service of thy father, and this heavy yoke which he put upon us lighter, and we will serve thee. And he said unto them, Depart ye for 3 days, then come again to me. And the people departed. He thought, okay, what am I going to do here? This is, Solomon had in the very beginning of his kingdom, he had an opportunity, a big decision to make, and he made a decision, and it greatly impacted his reign, and people feared him because of the decision that he's made. That was when the two women came with the one child. And these women were women of harlotry and prostitution and low-class people, and yet he judged equitably and fairly and righteously, and the wisdom of Solomon was established, and his reign was established from that particular point. His son comes along, and he also has a point of a major decision to be made, and he makes a decision vastly different to what his father would have made. And he makes a foolish decision. And what he says here, he says, Go away and leave me for 3 days. Verse number 6, And King Rehoboam consulted with the old men that stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived, and said, How do you advise that I may answer this people? And they spake unto him, saying, If thou wilt be a servant unto this people this day, and wilt serve them, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be thy servants forever. If you serve them, they will serve you. But he forsook the counsel of the old men, which they had given him, and consulted with the young men that were grown up with him, which stood before him. And he said unto them, What counsel give ye, that we may answer this people, who has spoken to me, saying, Make the yoke of thy father, which spake to me, saying, Make the yoke of thy father, make the yoke which thy father did put upon us lighter. And the young men that were grown up with him spake unto him, saying, Thus shalt thou speak unto the people that shall, I'm trying to read here, I'm having issues. Thus shalt thou speak unto this people that spake unto thee, saying, Thy father made our yoke heavy, but make thou this lighter unto us. Thus shalt thou say unto them, My little finger shall be thicker than my father's loins. Now whereas my father did laid with you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father hath chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. And basically their advice is, you're stepping into big shoes here, boy, and you need to just step up and just assert yourself upon the people. That's basically what their advice is. So he goes out there, green as all get up as a king, to assert his authority and his reign. It didn't work. Verse 12 says, So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the 3rd day, as the king had appointed, saying, Come to me again the 3rd day. The king answered and said, roughly, and he answered the people roughly. I mean, he's trying to assert himself here. I'm king. I'll tell you how I'm going to be king. And he tried to have the respect that Solomon built up over 40 years of being king. And the king answered the people roughly, and forsook the old men's counsel that gave them, and spake to them after the counsel of the young men, saying, My father made your yoke heavy, I will add to your yoke. my father also chastised you with whips, I will chastise you as scorpions. Wherefore the king hearkened not unto the people, for the cause was from the Lord, that he might perform his saying which his Lord spake by Ahijah the Shilonite unto Rehoboam the king of Nabat. So when all Israel saw that the king hearkened not unto the people, unto them, the people answered the king, What portion have we in David? Neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now see to thine own house, David. So Israel departed. So they said, we want nothing to do with you. David, your house, you keep to yourself. What portion do we have? Which is the same thing that, who was throwing rocks? Shimei said about being of the tribe of Saul. Saul was the tribe of Benjamin, saying, well, we're not, what do you have to do with us? What portion do we have? To your tents, O Israel, now see thine own house, David. So Israel departed unto their own tents. There's this division that takes place. All right. But as for the children of Israel, which dwelt in the cities of Judah, Rehoboam reigned over them. So he ruled over them. And then King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was over the tribute, the taxes. And all Israel stoned him with stones that he died. Therefore King Rehoboam made speed to get him up to his chariot to flee to Jerusalem. This sounds like the Boston Tea Party. If you know anything about the American history, they were they were buying tea from China, and the East Indies Trading Company, whatever it was selling tea from China into America, but they had this special deal with Britain that didn't have to pay taxes. And so it was over these taxes. Well, anyway, there's contention in those new fledgling colonies against England, and there was some that said, nope, we're not going to have this, and they went out into the boats that were carrying the tea, and they dumped the chests of tea into the Boston Harbor. And it's called the Boston Tea Party, and they threw that tea overboard. That was in 1774 or something like that. 1776 is when America became a nation. It's when they fought them off and signed the Declaration of Independence and all that sort of stuff. It was sort of the same thing taking place here. We ain't paying your taxes, England. There no taxation without representation was the big cry. You're taking our money and we have no voice into your parliament. We're cutting the taxes and we're having our own voice and our own people. And they did that. And that's very similar to what takes place here. And then what follows on when they declare that? The very thing after that is war. And we're heading the same way in our current climate as it is. World powers, there is a clash of world powers coming on us. America is going this way. China is going this way. And when they meet, there will be a time where one tries to keep their power, the other tries to assert their new upcoming power, and it's always a war or always some conflict that takes place for that for the powers to change over. That's where the world seems to be heading, even at this stage, a changing of the world powers and the economic structures. But don't worry, God's still in the throne. He knows these things. He works these things. And let me remind you of this: when the Antichrist who comes on to speak peace, you don't speak peace when there already is peace. You only need a man of peace when there is not peace, when there is turbulence and trouble upon the earth, and you need someone to stand up and bring peace to a troubled world. Well, that might be just the time for someone to step up into a troubled world. And there was trouble here. In this particular case, it was Jeroboam who stepped up, and that kingdom was they said, not paying your taxes. They went away, and it says in verse 9, so Israel rebelled against the house of David. And in verse 21, and when Rehoboam was come to Jerusalem, he assembled all the house of Judah with the tribes of Benjamin, 180,000 chosen men, which were warriors to fight against the house of Israel. There's the war. We ain't paying your taxes. All right, now it's coming to be a war. There's the same sort of power struggles that takes place in our world today. Anyway, Jeroboam, let's skip down to verse 25. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in Mount Ephraim and dwelt therein, And he went out from thence and built Penuel. So he goes to Shechem, sets up the northern kingdom. Jeroboam rules now as the beginning of the northern kingdom. Now this is where, now pay attention. If you've not missed everything, get this bit right now. The very first thing that he does, one of the very first things, verse 26. Jeroboam said in his heart, and this is not necessarily what he was thinking out loud, he was just thinking in his heart, thinking over what the circumstances and the political climate around him. And Jeroboam says this, now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. If this people go up to do sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then shall the heart of this people's turn again unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam king of Judah, and they shall kill me and go again to Rehoboam king of Judah. Well, what was in Jerusalem that they so would have gone to? A lovely temple. I mean, the glory of all the lands, this place. This was gold overlaid, woodwork, beautiful woodwork overlaid with gold. I mean, beautiful building. And now he says, right, if they're continually going down there to worship at the temple, then their heart is ultimately going to stay there, and at some stage they will give their allegiance back to Rehoboam, and my head is on the chopping block up here. And he's thinking through this. Man, I'm not going to be able to stay king over these people if they keep going down there. That's his sort of self-centered sort of mindset. And he says this, verse 28, whereupon the king took counsel. What do I do in this situation? And he made 2 calves of gold and said unto them, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And he set one in Bethel. Now Bethel is the most southern border of the northern kingdom. It's just north of Jerusalem. It's the most southern border of the northern kingdom. He set one there, and then he also sets one in Dan. There it is, verse 29. He sets one in Dan, which is the northernmost point. So he put one in the southern and put one in the north. He says it's too much for you guys to always be traveling up to Jerusalem. It's too much to be singing those psalms of ascent and going all the way down there every year. Too much. Here, let me make it a little bit more convenient for you, is what he says. And he sells this idea on convenience. But ultimately, he wanted the people to stay to him. And he wanted to keep as many people as he could without losing them. And he sold them on convenience. And I've said it before that convenience is always a good policy, politically speaking. Politically speaking. We'll make things convenient for you. And people are like, oh, well, great. This is wonderful. Well, your bread and your milk will cost more at the convenience store, but it's convenient. Oh, who cares? I know it's going to cost us more in the long run, but it's convenient. That's the same idea today. We are suckers for convenience. And so he said, right, let's make worship convenient. And they made it convenient. And they changed it and centered it around what people and men wanted and what would be good for them. And they made convenient worship and set up 2 calves that took their hearts away from God and set up a whole different system of religion. Had the trappings, and it looked similar, because he goes on to say, he made an high house. He made a house of high places and made priests of the lowest of the people. So he just took just maybe the unemployed, took people that are out of work. Anybody want to do this job? Anyone want to be a priest? And he took the base, low people and made them priests, which were not the sons of Levi. And Jeroboam ordained a feast in the 8th month on the 15th day of the month, like unto the feast that was in Judah, and he offered upon the altar. So did he in Bethel, sacrificing upon the calves that he had made, and he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places which he had made. So he offered upon the altar which he had made in Bethel, the 15th day of the 8th month, even in the month which he had devised of his own heart. What significance did the 15th day of the 8th month have? It was his daughter's new puppy's birthday, or something as silly as that. He just said, this is as good a day as ever. This is the day. It looked similar to the southern kingdom. It looked the same, but it was convenient, man-centered, and very different. Had priests, but they weren't Levites. Had feast days, but they had no significance. It had altars and sacrifice, but they were the calves. And it was a mix of all the religions around the place, and he offered it upon them. And he ordained a feast unto the children of Israel, and he offered upon the altar thereon. We don't have time to go any further than this. Those two calves that he set up at the beginning of the northern kingdom are central to the worship and the idolatry that takes place in the northern kingdom. And the next chapter is God prophesies against them and calls a prophet against them to prophesy against it. But those two calves are what are mentioned at the very end. And in fact, if you go to read through the Kings, it says, and they did evil in the sight of the Lord like unto Jeroboam. And they did evil unto the Lord like unto Jeroboam. In fact, it got so bad that Ahab takes it further and marries Jezebel, and the Baal, the high priestess of Baal, brings all that in. And then someone takes over after Ahab. I can't remember who it is. But it says this, and he did better. Basically says, and he did better. But he got rid of Baal worship that Ahab brought in. But he did evil in the sight of the Lord like unto Jeroboam. He brought revival of sorts, but he revived it back to the Jeroboam. That was the baseline for the northern kingdom, was Jeroboam and the idolatry and all the wickedness that kept coming in there. And that's what Hosea is dealing with, and the context and the history of Israel. And it's Israel's northern kingdom is sordid. It's just conspiracy, murder. 2-3 people are kings in a dynasty, and then there's a murder, and a new dynasty rises up, and then murder and a new dynasty. It's just horrendous. So when you read about the calves, know that they're very significant to the northern kingdom, and you'll see what is taking place in the book of Hosea, and we'll look at that next week. All right, find a prayer partner or two.